if you don't have enough swagger to say you want to be great, why do bother writing?
Welcome to Times Era Podcast. My name is Adam Wilcox. I'm your host. We are here in the Green Onion in beautiful Utica, New York, with the poet Orin Domenico. Orin is the author of this wonderful volume, My Rap Sheet is Long, which appeared in 2019. Orin, welcome.
Thank you.
So
I'm happy to be here at the GOP.
At the GOP. That's great.
No, this is the GOP, which is a funny thing, you know.
It is a grand old party. You've got this real dense, fiery, incredible work in this book. This book is it's incredible to be from the Mohawk Valley and read this because it's a myth-making book in a way, and you treat our environs and our mud and our trees and our streets in the way that you'd imagine Thoreau or Whitman or Frost treating their native haunts. You're a poet of place. And then you're grappling with these major issues. You take them head on, and it's so personal. So, I wanted to ask you because in the beginning of the book, you write a preface. You kind of set up the idea of your poetic lineage.
Right.
Talk about Gil Scott-Heron. You talk about being a bluesologist, which is fascinating. Ed Sanders blurbs the book. Obviously, especially in a number of the poems, the Beat Generation aesthetic is a natural seedbed for you. But there's so much else going on there as well. So maybe you could just say a few words about how you got into poetry, because you came to this practice relatively late in life. How'd that work?
Well, it's a funny thing. It's a great question, because when I was in sixth grade, we had a poetry unit, and I got totally into Robert Frost, and I produced a book. I was quite good at drawing, and I did drawings like fences and stopping by the woods on a summer evening, which I could still probably recite from beginning to end from doing that. I did an illustrated volume of this, and I think in a different environment, if I had been in a different household environment where following my passions and calling had been there, I would have known I was going to be a poet. Like, I'm reading about Lorca now, and it was like, the people who know from the beginning, this is what I am going to do. And I never did. I put it all aside. It wasn't until I was been teaching for quite a few years. I was nearly 50, and one day during one of my study halls, I wrote a poem. And at the time, I was involved in kind of this really deep biodynamic therapy. I had this great therapist, Jim Sisherman, who's a terrific guy. And eventually I got to the point where he told me, you've got to quit this job, don't you? And no one, excuse me, but no one ever says that to a teacher with tenure, at the age I was, because I had nowhere else to go. But Jim took the poem and gave it to a friend who was taught as SU or something, asked him if this, he said, you definitely should keep writing. That was the start of it, and then it did. Gradually, I wrote more and more and more and more frequently. When it came time, like I say in the introduction, when Will said, okay, we're going to do a big collection, I started going through the files in my books and so forth, and I could not believe how many poems I had written. At home, there's drawers really stacked like this. There's, of course, and stuff on the computer that doesn't take up much space, but there's volumes. And I continue with that pace, and I guess in some ways, it's probably a product of that very limitation of having started so late. It's rather akin to Robert Bly writes about how artists like Lorca or Keats, who are going to die young, their souls know this. And so they explode into, in meteoric brightness, they just explode. And so I've had, good Lord, I don't know how long I'm going to last, So I'm always having to just,
So you dug in, which is kind of remarkable because some poems in this collection, many of them, for me as a reader, you read it like I think of Hail to the Chief, and you think, Orin had some version of this experience and then probably was like, yeah, that's a poem.
Well, that the kids did look over the fence and said, "Are you Donald Trump?" And I'm like,
Trump.
"Yeah, right."
It's like, are you? And then I kind of think, I also know you have a daily discipline of writing.
Right.
So it's that balance between when the lightning strikes of an experience or muse, as you've said, and then also the kind of sitting down at the desk every day and kind of giving time over, and no matter what happens, whether a kind of lightning strikes or not. So
well, the thing is that the practice of the daily poem, which Bly did for a while, he has a couple collections of morning poems, and I forget what the other one's called. Now, where he took up this practice from one of his mentors, William Stafford, the great American Indian and poet. And Stafford just got up before everybody in the family every day and wrote a poem. And, people asked him, well, what if you aren't very good that day? He said, well, I lower my standards. And he talked about you just open yourself up to the golden thread that's dangling. And when that dangling golden thread arrives, you grab hold of it and you run with it, And, if you do that every day, maybe 1 out of 20, maybe you get a good one. Maybe that's even too high a ratio. I don't know, but but you do it. And then there's a process. I mean, the poems when they went into here, it was also the process of. It wasn't just winnowing; it was polishing. I'm going to put this on paper, print it. I've got to keep working it. Yeah, so.
Letting it emerge almost. I mean,
Will's better than that at that than anybody I know. He's a continual revisionist.
As an editor, or do you mean with his own work? As an editor, Will is, or do you mean with his own work?
With his own work.
Yeah.
Yeah, he never pushes me to mess with it.
Well, because I know you mentioned in the preface that he did play a role in sequencing the poems in this collection. So that's
I trusted him entirely. We went through this whole process. I mean, I said, okay, how are we going to do these? And I didn't like the idea of just doing them chronologically. Toyed with the idea of doing them thematically, where you break it up into here and there. And then I just let him do it in his pacing. I think, he's a kid, and he's new at this shit, but he's so fucking smart. And it works. It really, really works.
Well, I think, we all benefit from having a good invitation made to us, and I think that's the way that the poem sequence, because I have to say, like, what I got out of the first, say, third of the book was, muck, mud, place, mother, father.
The River Street Saga poem is an essential poem. I actually wish it appeared in a different, more original version than it is in here. He pushed me to take some of the vulgarity and roughness out of it that I wish I had left in. And I may, if we have a second edition of this, I may restore some of that, although it's essentially there. But the thing is that it's there in that poem that my beginnings are on the big bend in the river. The big bend in the Mohawk River that's there, and there was this creek. We had these various creeks. We had First Creek, Second Creek, Third Creek that went into the Mohawk along there. And in that circumstance, that land still in my family, The house goes back to pre-Civil War.
Oh yeah, that's the house that had already been almost 100 years old. Right. By the time you were a bambino, they came.
Right.
Yeah.
I have pictures. I mean, if I were to put more photographs and had been able to put, if we ever do another version, maybe I'll throw in another photograph with the River Street Saga of my great grandmother, the witch.
Yeah, the witch.
Who holding me on her hip in that garden. It would be perfect.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes for my money, a great poet is someone who can see their own life as these populated with these characters and making them real for us. Because, the vulgarity is actually an interesting question, because you talk about your antecedents both in the preface and throughout the poems. You dedicate poems. You also, something there is, you bring up Robert Frost by implication and the themes that are present in things like Mending Wall. For me, you've got then the Henry Miller side of you, where all of a sudden we're talking about,
Yeah.
and if you didn't go there, we wouldn't have it there, right? But I got to say though, for me, the thing that came through like crazy was actually Wordsworth, and now that might be my reading into it, but you have this kind
Well, that's what Gene Nasser thought.
Oh, really?
Gene Nasser came back and sent me things from, Wordsworth Prelude, that he saw echoed in what I was writing. Yeah,
You've
so.
got this childhood paganism vibe, and then you've got the lapsed Catholicism vibe, and then you've got this almost animism with Utica and Rome and the natural world. And another pattern that I recognize over the time, and you do it with imagery, but you also do it with language, and they kind of support one another. Like one example was, what is this here? Culture, cultivation. And these things appear in a trinity, and they elaborate. And to me, Wordsworth, even though he wasn't Catholic or a lapsed Catholic, you'd see things happening in threes all the time. So there'd be dawn, high noon, and sunset, and that would map over the course of a young man's life. Or you'd have this feeling of intense passion about being in the woods, and then he'd snap a branch and everything would get fucked. And then he'd have to step back from that in a third phase of kind of healing himself and saying, okay, I need to find a better way that I can enjoy nature without going and snapping the branches. So, but this seems natural for you. It seems your natural playground. And last thing before I want to kick it back to you, obviously there's so much music in this book. There's music, there's blues, and you go to length to say, hey, it's not necessarily a 12-bar blues, but it's my own blues. It's a Ginsbergian blues in many respects.
Well, there's my diction finally explained, which is kind of a funny poem, but
That's a fantastic poem. Will you read a little bit of that for us?
Sure. By the way, my poems are hard to read. Your tongue can stumble all over the place, but that's, so anyhow, it begins with the epigram is from Huck Finn. In a barrel of odds and ends, it is different. Things get mixed up, and the juice kind of swaps around, and things go better. My wolf pack American vernacular stew, a savory hobo trail yard jungle potpourri, begins with a base of Baltimore catechism moral matter from my old school RC pedigree, mixed with equal parts of classic Warner Brothers tough guy patter, Edward G. Robinson, and dark bogey, The Boys for Me. Stirred with a generous smatter of film noir's hard-boiled moral ambiguity and a pinch of its ironclad masculine honor code. When a man's partner is killed, he's supposed to do something about it. Then simmered with a spicy mess of Delta, New Orleans, Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, and Motor City blues, with undertones of Tombstone and Dry Bone and testimony to a man's need to have his ham bone boiled, all of it oiled with Bobby Frost and Willie B's old-school poetic metric musicality, sparked with a jigger of transcendental magic from the 19th century vault, whisked together with a queer cosmic consciousness of old Uncle Walt, blended with Allen's gay, sweet but fierce, free association beatnik jive. folded with a large dollop of honey from Jung's archetypal buzzing hive, then served in a battered tin pan alley cup, garnished with a handful of imported badass Sicilian Ne Sabato Il Caso pride. That's don't with me.
I had written that down. I wanted you to give that for us, so don't with me. That's great.
Is it don't with me? No, it's
Or it's I don't give a
I don't give a yeah. The story comes from a story I was told by Frank Ceruzzi that when Garibaldi's troops invaded Sicily, and then the Sicilians who joined them there and came up and invaded Calabria and took the Mezzogiorno of Italy, they wore armbands that said, I don't give a and you don't want to mess with people who wear armbands. Yeah. I think today we should all have an armband on that says I don't give a fuck.
So this is actually an interesting slight digression because that you're talking Garibaldi, that's 1861, 1862. This is the beginning of a modern Italy. This is
What?
National. And so, but you're also a political poet, but not in not in an oblique way. It's a constant presence in your poetry because you have concerns for issues. You're constantly talking about the imperial television, or we're talking about just being on the screens all the time. We're guilty of that now here too, but we want to get your message out to a wider audience.
Funny, I found a poem I wrote. I found Kim and I were cleaning out files. We were trying to clean the house up so someday the kids don't have to deal with all the crap we leave behind that doesn't have to be there. I found this collection that I, as a teacher, during my last years of teaching at Mohawk, that I had of my students' poems, and I put one in. And mine was about being on the internet. And it still worked. I looked at it, I said, Christ, if I'd known I had this poem, I would have put it in the collection. But that's been a really long-term theme with me. Yeah.
And I think these guys like Ginsberg, especially Ginsberg, but also I see in your poetic sensibility, again, this is just my reading, other beats like Gary Snyder, Gregory Corso are also present there.
Rexroth is my main man, but
Kenneth Rexroth, yeah, absolutely. But then you break into some formalism in different moments, or it's at least obliquely. Like, so for example, even in Hail to the Chief, you talk about kind of counting syllables on your fingers, and you do see poems like Jan Plan or kind of this blank verse. But you don't really.
Which one?
I think it's called Jan Plan.
Yeah.
Right. Plan, and it's this kind of. I'm like, oh, that's iambic. That's perfect iambic pentameter, but it doesn't feel like you're reading iambic pentameter because you're also enmeshed in your world. You've got short lines and long lines, and you've got all these voices that come in and out. You've got your relationships with Kim and your father and your grandmother and Mother Earth and the dirt and the cycle of the trade. So talk to me about.
You really read this book well. Thank you so much.
What's the role of a poet in our society? What role do you seek for yourself, and what when you see it in others that you appreciate and want to emulate? What do you think is missing from the scene, and what are you here to supply?
You made me right away think if I have a recent poem called "A Poet's Obligation," which takes off, here it is, A Poet's Sacred Obligation, which takes off from Neruda. Neruda said a poet's obligation is to open prison doors in people's minds. But this poet must first open his own prison doors. I don't know where it goes from there, but anyhow. I write elsewhere that in the introduction, I think I allude to the question that what's the use of poetry after Auschwitz or whatever?
Right. The Theodore Adorno.
The Adorno question and the answer that the Serbian or whatever poet came up with, that we have to both report on the past and the horrors of it, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, the continuing horrors, and at the same time holding forth the possibility of a future. And in that, I feel that's very much Lewis Mumford. Lewis Mumford, the great anarchist, urban theorist in large part, said that these moments when everything is breaking down and it looks like you're in hopeless collapse and there is no future, there is this opportunity at that moment for something incredibly unexpected to happen. And I try to write to that all the time because I do feel there is a possibility for something totally unexpected. But it's important, in order for that to happen, and I think of what Kim's writing right now, her latest essay, that you cannot, to get there, you cannot stay focused on your hatred of Trump and the Trumpies and all those crazy fucking people, but you have to get focused on your own passion.
Is this something about coming to poetry a little bit later in life? Because when you have 17, 18, 19-year-old poets, what you can find is an incredible ability to focus on that inner voice, but there's not always a lot of life lived. Whereas you've come to poetry, and what's remarkable to me about what you do is your concerns as a man are largely present and formed at that stage. So you know what you're about, and you've got a lot of story behind you. Cancer, jail, all the things we've talked about already, but Riverdale, precisely. And then, but you're able to keep up the intensity that we demand from our great poets. The ability to continue to listen, to continue to focus. All right. I'll put it to you.
It's okay. You can.
Well, you know.
I want to be. Hey, if you don't have enough swagger to say you want to be great, why bother writing?
We want you to enter into the conversation, you know, and so I always crack a book, you know. First time I ever cracked this was with some trepidation, and thank God, you know, it's a compulsive read, you know, but you could imagine it having gone the other way, and you know, it's a lot of work, it's a life's work, but I think there's got to be some chip on your shoulder, maybe. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but there's something that you're digging for that you need to clarify continually.
Chip on my shoulder. It's funny, you know, since I was talking to Kim, that I was supposed to have a reading in Rome, my hometown, that got canceled. It was in March of 2020, and it got canceled. It was like I had two things coming up that got canceled because COVID hit. We had the last reading over there. Tommy got to do a reading that we got in, and then boop, everything shut down. So, but Kim said, why do you want to do a reading in Rome since you hate going there? That I have this chip on my shoulder about Rome, you know? And that's a good question, you know. So this is better. I mean, if people can roam, can put the book in the bookstore there, but people can roam.
You talk about Rome in the book as almost a frontier town, in some respects.
Well, you know, I wrote there's a whole prose thing I wrote in Doubly Mad. It had like 9 or 10 episodes. I forget. Have you have a copy of the Bad Bunch?
I need to get it.
I got to give you. I'll give you. I have printed out ones where I can send you the file, and it's good stuff. I really should finish it. People have been begging me to finish it for years. It's a movie. It is fun. It's really, I mean, parts of it are hilarious. So anyhow, yeah, I have that, and that is when I first entered the research that led to writing The Bad Bunch, when the books of my great-grandfather's trial hearings first fell into my hands, I knew there was something I wanted. I mean, he was a murderer. The guy was a fucking murderer. And I knew I didn't know him, but I knew Uncle Patsy, one of his sons, who was like, he was a sociopath. I mean, he was just a nasty person. And the other one, Manny, who died of alcoholism, had been a machine gunner in World War I and had killed endless people. And so but I said, this guy has some energy that I need. He's on the back of the wall in the cafe right under the clock there. This man has some energy that I need. So I went looking for it. I went looking for this Sicilian chip on your shoulder energy that.
It's funny about poets, though. I mean, you think back through poetic history, just two names came to mind. They're both French, actually, but it's interesting. But Francois Villon, a guy knifed someone in a bar. Yeah. And then you've got Arthur Rimbaud, who retires from poetry at practically age 19 and then goes and runs guns down in Africa. There's something mad about it, right? And that energy that is needed to keep on it. I don't know. It's okay. So let's talk about the title a little bit here. Let's just talk about the title, because early on, you've got this wonderful. It may be in the first poem. Early on, you've got the word sentences appear and sell, and you think about the art of making sentences or phrases.
Ending my sentence with a proposition.
Oh, that poem's fantastic.
You know what? It's a reference to. I forget their names. You remember the two young men who were these society rich boys, gay, together, who decided to create that they would commit the perfect murder and not get caught, and they did get caught, and they went to prison. And the one of them who was in prison hit on an inmate who killed him. And the tabloids were so good in that day that the famous headline, who would have thought someone so erudite would have ended his sentence with a proposition? Hilarious. With a proposition. Such a fucking play on words. It's beautiful.
It's amazing.
You could never do that today. Everybody's too stupid.
But the other thing that it does, because you've got you give the proposition towards the end of the poem, but you're also still in the opening of the book, so we're actually learning about what your poetic style and diction actually is. Right. So the idea that we're playing with grammar while punning, while actually giving this kind of Sicilian swag, if you will, making a proposition, it all comes together so nice. It sets the tone.
Well,
for the rest of the book.
There's Will. Why did he put that first?
The poems in the second half of the book get even madder in a way, and I mean that in Mad Hatter way, right? Because it's almost like your comic voice really opens up, and the kind of almost demented imagination.
PSDE Blues, for instance, it's about the. I mean, it was just like so chilling when I read that they had a goddamn designation for this thing that was killing whales because of the amount of polyethylene flotsam that was. Like, what are we doing?
That's a good question. What are we doing? What are we doing?
Man, one more for the road. I say, like I said, Will did a hell of a job. And I love where the book ends. I mean, with the prayers, and that's a poem that Sanders referred to in his review. The prayers uttered when I was young, whether whispered, chanted, or sung, went straight to God's attentive ear, for I had not then learned to fear that no one heard my incantations. Like the spider who late last night wove this ephemeral web so tight between the arm and back of this plastic chair, I assumed the universe would care for all its most fragile creations. But now, 6 hard decades hence, and speaking in the present tense, I know that nothing's built to last, that both web and I will soon be cast into the tender abyss from whence we came. Having learned that to succeed, all my prayers must learn to bleed, I place this poem upon a paper altar, where it will perish like all the rest. It's in their making that I am blessed. 1, 2, 3, no, there's only 4 of them now.
That's a theme you come back to time and again as well, in that no matter what happens, no matter how many days you have left to live, no matter what glory comes of this, actually the theme is expressed in, I think it's called In Praise of Hunger, where you say it's not just the food we should be thankful for, it's the damn hunger.
Yeah.
And that's echoed to me in your idea that it's the fact that you're able to make these things, which is part of the benediction.
That's an idea that came to me through Bly's translations of Kabir. I think the thirst is more important than the. Yeah.
So my rap sheet is long. How long has that phrase been in your head? When did that come to you? And you said this is.
It's funny. It does not appear in a poem. It does not appear in a poem, and I think it was Will pointing out to me that my poems were kind of evolving into the kind of raps, and I don't know. It just one day and something I was writing to Will and Ruth or something. It came to me. That's the name. My rap sheet is long. I can't tell you more. I mean, of course, it plays off the fact that I have a rap sheet. All the offenses of my rap sheet aren't even in the book.
Right. It's a little editorial, slicing, but it also, even if you hadn't had a rap sheet, when you come to poetry in your late 40s and you've got a life under your belt and you've got kids and you've got a 20-year marriage at that point and you've got stuff in the pipes, it's like, here we go.
Your rap sheet's long,
because you get,
Well, that's the long body. That's what the Iroquois call it, the long body, and that's what you're always reaching for. To be, you have to fill out your part of the long body, and those that follow the poem, the Old Men, or any of the poems that talk about the succession. That what Kim and I are always preaching is we want everybody to pick up a pen or something, and to do their own. This is all creativity. This all keeps the creative energy humming within our community and so forth. And I want my son, I want my brother-in-law Aaron, and eventually Nico and Cora to all pick up their own form of expression, because this is the only way we can break through the kind of neoliberal bullshit lives of jobs and careers and crap, and produce a real resistance, that's rooted in the commons, We're recreating the commons continually when we do this work.
Well, you say we need to be a nation of poets.
Oh yeah.
That there's actually a corrective built into the habit, but what you've done here in My Rap Sheet is Long is not only have you inculcated the practice and the habit, but you've seen it through into this piece of artwork. This is now, bound and ready and read and out there, and it's, there's something to, almost a kind of a parochial habit of journaling or writing, and that's one thing. But this is different because it's actually entering into a bigger conversation, and it's a conversation that's happening in the moment with other people who live in this current moment in time, and people who live in this current location. But it's also a conversation that goes backwards into time, where you can pull conversations that have been existing for a long time and bring them forward and keep them going. Important conversations that if we lose because we're always looking at screens or we're always at the drive-through, whatever it is, right?
Part of what everything we've done has always been about is the idea of face-to-face. It's funny, I mean, you keep referring to things, I keep thinking of things from here I want to read, like The Table. I love The Table. Terroir.
Terroir is a beautiful poem. Terroir is also a poem which blends, I think, perfectly, and maybe we can think of this as a nice send-off. Terroir, when I think of terroir, you think of what is the wine displaying, and it displays the place that it's from.
Right.
Right? And so you're blending your love of place, you're blending your kind of landscape painterly eye with also a kind of Dionysian fun. And I feel like you're like the mule that keeps kicking. So I'm glad to see that you're prodigiously churning out pages and pages.
It's just we keep this all rolling. I really appreciate, by the way, you're reading this as closely as you have. Really means something to me. And I want to say to everyone, by the way, that should you become intrigued with this, and this is not just because I want to make money, but because you might really love it, you can pick this up by going to the Other Side website, and you can buy it on there. You can buy this book there. It's called A Word Spider at the Wedding Rehearsal Dinner, 1 week ago tonight. When I was in my 50s and folks said, "You look just like a movie star," they were thinking grizzled Sean Connery. In my 60s, maybe William Holden, if he'd lived a little longer. Now, in my 70s, perhaps Gerard Depardieu, whose proboscis now looks like a lumpy potato. Across the valley, up on the Deerfield Ridge, red lights on cell towers, rhythmic flashing. I hear the sad bells of rhythmy clashing. Round the recessed deck lights below the red-striped awning, spiders have woven their intricate webs where doomed mosquitoes and moths drawn to the light are snagged in a sticky filament hell where round-bellied Beelzebub Boris devours them. Inside, folks from here, there, and everywhere are getting to small talk, know one another. Out here in the cool of the evening, I'm stitching disparate threads together like a big word-slinging spider. As the bishop of connectivity, I need my golden conical mitre. Like Bo Diddley, I'm a lover, not a fighter. Down at Tiny's, Mags is blowing. Back here, I got cards that I ain't showing. That's it. I think the end needs work with that one, but we'll see.
Tiny's is another mythical place. So, anyways, thank you for mythologizing Utica for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This
Boom.
is great.
Cheers.